All right, let's talk about something we do all day, every day, without ever really thinking about it. And that is deciding that two things are the same. It sounds so basic, right? But it turns out there's this whole hidden set of rules that governs how we actually build the idea of identity in our minds. So let's just jump right in and put those rules to the test. Okay, take a look at this. Let's say, just by looking, you can't tell the difference between shade A and shade B. To your eyes, they're the same. And the same goes for B and C. So logically, A should be identical to C, shouldn't it? But, well, it's not even close. So what's going on here? How is this possible? It feels like we just broke a fundamental rule of logic. To get to the bottom of this, we have to completely flip our perspective. The answer isn't about finding some pre-existing sameness out there in the world. No, the answer is all about understanding how we are actively creating it inside our own heads. And this big idea has a name, the abstraction of identification. Now, the key word here is active. This isn't a passive process. Your brain isn't just a camera that discovers things that are already identical. Think of it more like a sculptor who takes the raw, messy block of reality and deliberately carves the concept of sameness out of it. So how does that even work? Well, it's kind of like a three-step process. First, we look out at the world, which is incredibly messy and detailed, right? Then our brain makes a conscious, deliberate choice. And based on that choice, we decide to treat things that are technically different as if they were identical, because it helps us achieve a certain goal. It is an act of creation. Now, if we're building this idea of identity, you think we need some kind of toolkit, right? And we do. It's built on three formal properties. You can think of them as the three pillars that hold up this entire construction project. First up, we have Pillar 1, reflexivity. Now, this is the simplest rule, and it might even sound a little silly, but it is the absolute bedrock. It just says that anything is identical to itself. A always equals A. This laptop is this laptop. It sounds obvious, I know, but without this stable foundation, the whole concept of identity just falls apart. So yeah, reflexivity gives us that solid ground we need to stand on. It's the simple, stable anchor point. Without it, you couldn't even say an object has a consistent identity from one moment to the next. It might be the simplest of the three pillars, but it's the one everything else is built on. Okay, pillar 2 is symmetry, and this one is all about establishing that identity is a two-way street. It says that if A is identical to B, then it's a guarantee that B is also identical to A. You can't have a one-sided sameness. So think of it this way. Identity isn't an arrow pointing from one thing to another. It's much more like a handshake, a mutual agreement. If that car is identical to this car, then this car has to be identical to that one. The relationship is perfectly balanced. And that brings us to our third and final pillar, transitivity. Now, this is the rule that really gives us power, the one that lets us build long chains of logic. It says that if A is identical to B and B is identical to C, then it logically must follow that A is also identical to C. And this is just a beautiful illustration of what transitivity does. It forges the links in a chain of reason. It lets us take two separate facts and connect them to create a brand new insight, linking things that weren't directly touching before. This is where things get really powerful, but it's also where things can start to break down. Okay, quick recap. We have our three pillars, reflexivity, symmetry, and transitivity. We've got our toolkit, so let's go back to our color puzzle and figure out exactly why that logical chain just seemed to snap in half. The entire solution hinges on understanding that we're dealing with two totally different types of sameness. On one side, you've got this perfect abstract idea called logical identity. It always follows the rules, no exceptions. But on the other side, you have something called empirical indiscernibility, which is really just a fancy way of saying what our senses tell us. And as it turns out, what our senses tell us, well, it doesn't always play by the rules. And here it is, the big aha moment, right from the source material. It says that empirical indiscernibility, again, what we perceive, is not normally transitive. And that's the whole key. That perfect abstract rule of transitivity, it just doesn't always apply to the messy, limited information we get from our eyes and ears. So let's solve the puzzle once and for all. The difference in color between A and B, it's real, but it's just too tiny for our eyes to pick up on. Same thing for B and C. But when you add those two tiny, invisible differences together, the total difference becomes big enough for our eyes to finally see it. Our perception simply fails the transitivity test. The logical chain breaks the second it runs up against the physical limits of the real world. So, you might be thinking, why does any of this matter? It matters because this whole process of creating sameness isn't a flaw in our thinking. It's actually one of our most incredible cognitive superpowers. It's literally how we make sense of a universe that would otherwise be infinitely complex. So what's the big takeaway here? At the end of the day, we take a continuous, chaotic, messy world and we impose order on it. We make this deliberate decision to treat different things as identical. And doing this is what allows us to create categories, to use logic, to reason about anything at all. I mean, without this tool, every single leaf on a tree would be a completely unique object we'd have to analyze from scratch. This ability to create sameness is a fundamental tool for how we think.
So, I'll leave you with a final question to chew on. We've just seen that something as basic as sameness isn't something we find, it's something we make. And if that's true, it really makes you wonder, right? What other fundamental parts of our reality are we not just observing, but actively constructing every single day without even realizing it?